Hello, grade 9 students. In this video, we're going to talk about respiration. We'll be summarizing the whole chapter in this video. So let's start. First, you have to know the organization of the respiratory system of humans. What do we have? We have first the nasal cavities. We have the mouth, pharynx, larynx. We have the trachea. We have the lung, which is the most important organ. We have the bronchus, here the branches. We have the bronchioles, the small branches that move to the alveoli, which are the air sacs. And here we have the diaphragm, which is the muscle. So here we're going to talk about the pathway of air along the respiratory system. First, we start with the nasal cavities. Then we move to the pharynx. Then to the larynx, and then to the trachea, to the bronchus, to the bronchioles, and finally to the alveoli, to the air sacs. First, what is breathing? Breathing is the actual mechanical intake of air. It consists of two phases, inhalation and exhalation. They are called the respiratory movements. So inhalation is the process of taking air in, which is rich in oxygen, and pouring carbon dioxide, whereas exhalation is the process of releasing air outside the body, which is where the air is poor in O2 and rich in CO2. With the meaning of diffusion, and pay attention to this term. Diffusion is the movement of particles of a substance from a medium of high concentration or high pressure or high volume or high amount to a medium of low concentration, low pressure, low volume, low amount in the same substance. So what is the role of the respiratory system? The respiratory system is known to be responsible for the gaseous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, that we call them respiratory gases, with the environment. So in question number 2, we trace the pathway of air inside the respiratory system. We start with the nose, with the nasal cavities, then to the pharynx, then to the larynx, to the trachea, to the bronchus, where the process is called bronchi, branch of the bronchus, bronchioles, alveolus, which is the air sac, where the plural is called alveoli. Lungs, they are known to be spongy. Why? Because they have many pores for the air sacs, and also they are light and elastic. We have two lungs, right lungs made up of 3 lobes, and the left lung made up of 2 lobes. Gas exchange between air and blood occurs at the level of the alveoli in the lungs. So what are the characteristics that favor the gas exchange at the level of the alveoli? You have to study them. First, number 1, we have large surface area of exchange at the level of the alveoli, thin wall of alveoli, highly vascularized, rich in blood vessels. Activity 3, respiratory gas exchange. Which gases are the respiratory gases? Already we know that they are the oxygen and a carbon dioxide. But let's see here. Here we have this question, this application. In this table, we have the variation of the quantity of oxygen and carbon dioxide, which are the respiratory gases, in milliliter for each 100 milliliter of blood, and blood entering the lungs and blood leaving the lungs. Okay? So, and first question, compare the results of the table showing the composition of blood entering, blood leaving. Interpret the results. As you see here, blood entering, the amount of oxygen was 15, while the blood leaving it was 20. Carbon dioxide in the blood entering 53, in the blood leaving it was 49. Here 15 it increases to 20. 53 it decreases to 49. So The blood entering the lungs contains less oxygen, 15 milliliter, than the blood leaving the lungs, which is 20 milliliter, whereas the blood entering the lungs contains more carbon dioxide, 53 milliliter, than the blood leaving the lungs, which is 49 milliliter. Interpret, the quantity of oxygen gas in blood entering the lungs is 15 milliliter, and here interpret increases. You don't have to say less than or greater than. So this indicates that the oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs, medium rich in oxygen, to the blood, medium poor in oxygen, or less amount in oxygen, less concentration. While the quantity of carbon dioxide in blood entering the lungs is 53 milliliter, and it decreases. Pay attention here, increases and decreases, okay? And the interpret, analysis plus indication, to 49 milliliter in the blood leaving the lungs. This indicates that the carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood, medium rich in carbon dioxide, to the lungs, medium poor in carbon dioxide. So, in this, we determine that in the interpret, we don't have to use greater than or less than, while we use it in the case of compare. In the case of interpret, it's analyze plus an indication. So analysis, you have to say increases or decreases. You have to know from now on that the oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs to the blood, lungs medium rich in oxygen, to the blood, medium poor in oxygen, whereas carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood, medium rich in carbon dioxide, to the lungs, medium, which is poor in carbon dioxide. Gas. Question number 2 says you have to describe the gas reciprocal change with the blood at the level of the alveolus. So the oxygen gas, it diffuses from the lungs, medium, that's rich in oxygen, toward the blood, which is medium poor in oxygen. So here the oxygen gas diffuses from a medium of high concentration of oxygen, which is the lungs, to the medium of low concentration of oxygen, which is blood. Whereas carbon dioxide gas diffuses from the medium that's rich in carbon dioxide, which is the blood, to the medium that is poor in carbon dioxide, the lungs. Question 3 says that you have to describe the respiratory gas exchange with blood at the level of the tissues. You have to know that oxygen gas diffuses from blood, which is rich in O2, to the cells or tissues or organs that are poor in O2, whereas carbon dioxide gas diffuses from the cells that are rich in CO2 to the blood that is poor in CO2. Question 4. What favors the respiratory gas exchange at the level of the capillaries? Number 1, large surface area of the capillaries. Number 2, thin wall of blood vessels. Number 3, slow circulation of blood capillaries. Activity 4, transport of respiratory gases. In this figure, we have blood entering the lungs. The blood entering the lungs has dark red color. Why? Since it's poor in oxygen gas. Whereas blood leaving the lungs is going to be bright red in color. Why? Because it's rich in oxygen gas. So as you see here, we have the property here. We have poor in oxygen. That's why it's dark red in color, since it's poor in oxygen. At the level of the alveoli, we have diffusion. So oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs toward the blood, and carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood toward the lungs. How? Oxygen gas diffuses from the medium of high concentration of oxygen, which is the alveoli, to the medium of low concentration of oxygen, which is the blood. So as I said, oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs, medium rich in O2, to the blood, medium poor in O2. Whereas the opposite is true for carbon dioxide, where carbon dioxide gas diffuses from the blood, the medium that's rich in CO2, to the lungs, the medium that is poor in CO2. So as such, the blood is going to be rich in oxygen. The color of the blood is going to change into bright red color. This describes all the process that occurs in this. How are these gases transported by the blood? We're going to identify this in the second point of the respiration. This represents the components of the blood. Plasma, mostly water, carries dissolved molecules and plasma proteins. They are important for clotting. Red blood cells, they transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. They are bound to hemoglobin. They contain no nucleus. They are called anucleated cells. The red blood cells, they are called anucleated cells. They can't repair themselves. They have a lifespan of about 120 days. White blood cells, as you get it in grade 8, they are called the immune cells. They have a role in the immunity. Hematocrit, it represents the percentage by volume of the red blood cells in the blood. The percentage by volume of red blood cells in blood is called hematocrit. So let's repeat. We have plasma protein for clotting. It's important. It's called platelets. White blood cells and the platelets, they represent less than 1%. The RBCs, red blood cells, they represent about 45%, and the plasma represents 55%. Plasma carries dissolved molecules and contains plasma proteins for clottings. White blood cells and platelets, they represent less than 1%, and the red blood cells, they represent about 45%. They transport oxygen and carbon dioxide bound to hemoglobin, Hb, of symbol Hb. Red blood cells, they are anucleated. They don't have a nucleus. They can't repair themselves, and they have a lifespan of about 120 days. White blood cells, or they are called the immune cells, as we said, they have a role in immunity. Hematocrit, it represents percentage by volume of the red blood cells in the blood. The red blood cells, they are disc shaped. They look like the shape of a disc. They are anucleated, meaning that they don't have a nucleus. They are without a nucleus. We have about 5 million red blood cells per millimeter cube, and red blood cells contain a protein called hemoglobin that is bound to either carbon dioxide or oxygen gas, that we call them oxygen and carbon dioxide. They are called the respiratory gases. Also, you have to know that hemoglobin can bind to O2, oxygen gas, or to CO2, carbon dioxide gas. These are the notes related to the part 1 of our new chapter, respiration. How are the respiratory gases transported by hemoglobin? Here we're going to talk about the forms of transport of oxygen gas and forms of transport of carbon dioxide gas. Forms of transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen is transported in two forms in blood, either in the form of oxyhemoglobin HbO8, which represent about 98%, or in the form of oxygen dissolved in plasma, which represents about 2%. Whereas carbon dioxide is transported in three forms. In carbohemoglobin form, HbCO2, it's 20%. Carbon dioxide dissolved in plasma, 10%. Mostly in the form of bicarbonate dissolved in plasma, which represent 70%. So reaction with oxygen with hemoglobin in a blood. In the medium that's rich in O2, in oxygen gas, like the lungs for example, hemoglobin binds oxygen. So hemoglobin will bind to oxygen to give oxyhemoglobin in the medium rich in O2. For oxygen plus hemoglobin give oxyhemoglobin in order to balance the equation. This is called the word equation. Whereas the chemical equation, 4O2 plus Hb, it gives HbO8. This is called the chemical one. While in the medium that's poor in O2, like the tissues, HbO8, which is the oxyhemoglobin, will dissociate to give hemoglobin and oxygen. This is what we need, release of oxygen. So oxyhemoglobin will give 4 oxygen plus hemoglobin. This is the word equation. While the chemical equation, HbO8 will give 4O2 plus Hb. General reaction, 4 oxygen plus hemoglobin. In the medium range, we can move to this direction to give oxyhemoglobin, while in the medium poor, we can move to the opposite, where oxyhemoglobin can give hemoglobin plus oxygen. This is the word equation. Chemical equation, 4O2 plus Hb, it gives HbO8. Medium rich, we're moving to this direction. Medium poor, in the opposite one. So the reaction between oxygen and hemoglobin is reversible. What the meaning of reversible? It's unstable, where hemoglobin binds oxygen in a medium rich in oxygen and releases it in a medium poor in oxygen. Reaction of carbon dioxide with hemoglobin. In the medium that's rich in CO2, like the case of tissues, Hb can bind to carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide plus hemoglobin can give carbohemoglobin. This is the word equation. The chemical equation, CO2 plus Hb gives HbCO2. And these notes, reactions, you have to study them. While in the medium that's poor in CO2, like the cases of the lungs, HbCO2 dissociates and releases CO2. So carbohemoglobin will dissociate, give carbon dioxide plus hemoglobin. This occurs in the medium that's poor in CO2, like the lungs. And here, the chemical equation, HbCO2 will give CO2 plus Hb. This is the general equation, or the overall one. Overall word equation, carbon dioxide plus hemoglobin in the medium rich can give CO2, rich in CO2 can give carbohemoglobin, whereas carbohemoglobin in the medium that's poor in CO2 will give hemoglobin plus carbon dioxide. This is the word equation, and this is the chemical one. So also you have to know that the reaction between carbon dioxide and hemoglobin is reversible. It's unstable, where hemoglobin binds carbon dioxide in the medium that's rich in carbon dioxide and releases it in the medium that's poor in carbon dioxide. Let's move now to the reaction of carbon monoxide with hemoglobin. Carbon monoxide, CO, is present in smoke. It binds in an irreversible manner, meaning that in a stable manner, to hemoglobin and prevent the binding of oxygen and carbon dioxide. As such, less oxygen is delivered to the body cells, so they can produce less energy, and carbon dioxide accumulate in these tissues, leading to intoxication. So chemical equation, CO plus Hb will give HbCO.